Okay, we're going to do an in-between video that I'm not going to teach the poses this time. I want to give a little bit of feedback that might be helpful to you. There was a student that I was in contact with this week, and I'm going to look up our text conversation and share some of that with you. Um, he says, I've been doing yoga most mornings this past week. Sun salutes plus the after breathing. He's talking about the closing where you do the breathing part after doing the sun salutes. So that's great. You might be to the place where you're just doing the sun salutes and the closing, and you need to do that enough times until that feels more comfortable. So if you can do 3 sun salute A, 3 sun salute Bs, and the closing, that's a great start. And then you can start using the other videos a little bit more after that when you feel comfortable with that. This is not a fast process. That said, some people are in physical condition that they're ready and their mind is the kind that wants to jump in. So do what is comfortable for you. So my feedback to the student is that that was great to have that regular practice. And this person is a pianist. I said, as a pianist, you understand how consistent practice accumulates. And then I asked the simple question, how has your body and mind been feeling? So he responds, yeah, that makes sense about accumulating and practicing consistently. He says, I think the yoga helps, but it's hard to tell exactly because I've been stressed out from job search and being away from my wife and children. So I don't have a really good baseline to compare against right now. And I said, that's exactly right. You start with a baseline, and it's always hard to know what to compare it to. Change is most often slow, but taking note of what you feel like today will help you notice the difference later. So, of course, when you very first start, you don't have a baseline, but you have to pay attention. What does this feel like? How do I feel? So that you have something to compare it to later. Earlier in my yoga practice several years ago, I was taking some careful notes and noticing changes over the course of many months. And that was useful to me to keep me motivated because I could see some of the changes. I said muscle flexibility, in other words, range of motion, may be one of the easiest things to notice change. So it's the most obvious one for us is like our physical body. And he reports, yeah, I can't get my hands to touch the floor when I'm standing. That's pretty normal. He says, I think the least flexible part is when you sit cross-legged and bend forward with your head on the ground. I don't think I can get my head even close to belly button height. Okay, so that is great feedback. That is a record of where he is now. And there is this tendency to think, oh, it's not good enough. There is this temptation to think, man, if I don't look like the teacher or that model that I'm looking at, then maybe I'm not so good. All right, now we're starting to get into yoga when we have those kinds of thoughts. All right, so let's go back and talk about the flexibility. Of course, unless you have been doing something, your hamstrings or that part of the back of the leg that you feel when you do a forward fold, they are not going to be flexible enough to get your hands to the floor. That is absolutely normal unless you've been doing something conscientiously and consistently for a long time. So if you're an athlete and you've been doing calisthenics, if you are a dancer and you've been doing various exercises for dancing, then of course that's going to be different. But if you haven't had those kinds of exposure, then yeah, you're not going to be able to touch the floor. So in order to get your hands to the floor, bend your knees. Like maybe it's even close to a squat on your forward fold. And you will notice over time that that will change. And that's what it's all about, is slow incremental change. All right, so that's tip number 1 on your forward fold. If you can't touch the floor, don't sweat it. Bend your knees and get your hands to the floor. If you can't do that, just get your hands to your thighs, to your knees, to your shins, wherever. You have to start where you are. You have no other option. So that's the forward fold. It's similar, right? When you're seated and you're trying to go forward, it may be that you barely go forward in that position, depending on your anatomy and the kinds of stretches you've done leading up to this. That is not a problem. You just go as far forward as you can. But notice again, if you keep doing this in a number of weeks, months, and years, that is going to change. And I can tell you right now that I couldn't do any of those things when I started this practice. It really does change, obviously. I said, if you keep going for 10 plus years, the change in flexibility is ridiculously obvious. That's not the real point of yoga, but it is an easy effect to notice. All right, so that's part 1 of this video. You have whatever range of motion you have, and you will keep working on that range of motion. But that's not the point. That's not the main thing that you're trying to do. If that's all you're doing, you can just take a calisthenics class. You can just go to the gym and they will teach you exercises, and that is great. And I'm not knocking that by any stretch of the imagination. That's really good for your body, but it's not really yoga. Okay, so what is yoga? I'm going to refer to, if you were studying with us the book work, I'm going to refer to the Yoga Sutras. And I've introduced this book in other videos. Go on to the website, the link that says study with us, and you can learn more about this book. But this is kind of the foundational, or the, what do you call it, the resource for yoga, or at least one of them, the Yoga Sutras. And this is specifically some things that it talks about yoga pose. It says, yoga pose is a steady and comfortable position. So if it's not comfortable, maybe you're pushing too hard. But you have to push a little bit in order to make progress. It's not a push, though. It's just a noticing and allowing it to unfold. So, number 1, it's meant to be steady and comfortable when you're in that pose. At least that's the goal you're working towards. It says, yoga pose is mastered by relaxation of effort, lessening the tendency for restless breath, and promoting an identification of oneself as living within the infinite breath of life. Okay, what does that all mean? So after you memorize at least part of the series, I will then help you to start really noticing the breath. And there is a breath, an inhale and an exhale. I've already started teaching you, but we will focus more on the quality of that breath. Once you've done this for a long time, you start to realize that it's the breath that is moving you along, and it's really the breath that cleans out the mind. It cleans out, some people call it mental floss. It makes you just more steady in your life, not only in your pose, but when you get off the mat, you feel more steady emotionally, physically, and so on. All right, one more verse from the Yoga Sutras. If you're curious, this is book 2. I am now reading sutra number 48 from that book. From that perfection of yoga posture. Okay, so once you get that down, the memorization, the breath, the ability to do it with ease, duality, such as reacting to praise and criticism, ceases to be a disturbance. Okay, so let's talk about the duality inside of us. Sometimes we call it ego. So we have this part of us that is very physical, mortal, Like we want things to be a certain way in society. We want praise. And when somebody criticizes us, our nervous system gets kind of, feels bad. And when somebody says, oh, you're great, that was great, then our nervous system's like, oh, good. And we get some dopamine and it's all great. So that duality can become a disturbance because when we're not getting the praise, we become disturbed. When we are getting criticism, we become disturbed. The disturbance is in the nervous system. So what you're going to learn if you keep doing yoga and you do the true purpose is that eventually that duality just doesn't really bother you so much anymore. When I first started this practice for years, my teacher would come and correct me, show me the next step. And in my nervous system, I'd be like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. And I felt really bothered because I felt like she was criticizing me. She wasn't. She was just teaching me the next thing. But I was in the habit of believing that if somebody was teaching me something and I was doing it wrong initially, in my mind wrong, or not ideal, then I had this feeling that, oh, something's wrong with me. On the other hand, if she would say, hey, good job, I would go, oh, well, there I go. I'm doing a good job and I must be a good yogi. And it would create another type of feeling in my nervous system. After a long time, when I go to my teacher, I feel quite neutral between suggestions of what's next. And it doesn't feel like criticism anymore. And I feel relatively neutral when she says, wow, that was beautiful. Like, I do like the praise better. And I don't like criticism, but my nervous system does not react in the same way. Okay, so that is what we are trying to learn through our asana or the poses, this practice, is to change our body, unblock energy that is there habitually, and then become unified with ourself instead of having this duality. All right, I hope that helps. If you have not gotten to the point where you feel pretty comfortable with the memorized 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 that I taught in the last video, you can repeat that as many times as you want in order to get more and more comfortable. And the question is, can you turn that off and still do the practice? Is it memorized? You're really going for memorization right now. Once you have that simple series memorized, very short series memorized, then you'll be ready to go on to the next video. And I'm going to start talking a little bit more about the breath and paying attention to the breath. We're still going to do the same 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 poses, but we're going to refine it. All right, so hopefully you're ready to move on, but if you're not, please go to wherever you need to be right now in order to feel comfortable that you have some level of memorization of the sun salutes, of the standing poses, of the seated poses, of the closing poses.